going to stand where Lily was standing as well.
Yes, I think it helps with the onliners.
People can. Good afternoon. Thank you for the introductions, Wendy, and for setting the scene, Lily. One of the more extraordinary and delightful aspects of this project is that during the 2 years that it took place, all three of us conceived and, in Lily and Carrie's case, delivered beautiful baby daughters. I'd like to sort of talk about the gestation of the Emma Toolkit with perhaps paying in honour of Josephine, Evie and Mariam. It was a labour of love. Conveniently, the development of the toolkit happened in 3 phases, and 3 trimesters, if you like. The first one, Lily has just mentioned, was really about deciding what the toolkit ought to do. It was a piece of research. The questions we were addressing were, what do the staff of humanitarian agencies on the ground in emergencies need and want to know about market systems? What are their capabilities to find that out? And what kind of tools are already out there that are relevant to helping them do that? In order to answer those questions, I recruited a very able colleague, Emmett Murphy, who's currently running ACDI VOCA's program in Jacmel in Haiti. He did, with my help, a lot of legwork of interviewing people on the ground. We interviewed about 30 different people from 14 organisations. And I won't try and summarise the detailed conclusions that we came to. The bottom line was that it looked like a tailor-made toolkit was needed to meet the particular needs and demands that this audience were facing. And I think perhaps the best way to sum it up is an email that I had from Paul Harvey here, in which it just kind of captures the ethos of what we hope that the Emma Toolkit achieves. What he said to me was, there's a tendency to overcomplicate and mystify market analysis, and to assume that market experts are needed, when really the basic questions are quite straightforward and could be tackled by anyone with a willingness to go out and talk to a few people. And that's the ethos of the toolkit, although it's ended up being a lot bigger perhaps than he imagined. It aims at the end of the day to help people who are not experts have the confidence to go out and ask a few questions. That wouldn't have been possible without the support of Oxfam, obviously, IRC, the OFDA, and the Waterloo Foundation, who then agreed to fund the next 2 phases of the project. The second phase of the project was the development of the toolkit itself, and there are 4 key characteristics that we were asked to achieve. 1, it had to be quick and it had to be basic. It had to be usable in the early stages of a crisis. Secondly, it had to be relevant to both meeting people's survival needs, but also looking at protecting livelihoods and promoting early economic recovery. Thirdly, it had to be relevant to the analysis of markets that are critical for people's income, as well as markets that are important for the supply of material needs or meeting of material needs. And finally, it had to encourage or give agencies the confidence to consider a broader range of responses, so that aid resources would be used more effectively. Now, someone once said innovation is not always about creating something new. In fact, it's usually more often about rearranging the old in a new way. And the basic ideas that you find in the Emma Toolkit come from a lot of familiar and established quarters. I'll give you 2 examples without going into too much detail. One is the HEA, the Household Economic Analysis. That uses a kind of a logical sequence of sort of steps where you start with baseline analysis, you look at outcome analysis, and you then move into response analysis. And in much the same way, with Emma, we set up essentially 3 strands. Those are the gap analysis, which is about understanding the priority needs and the preferences of the target population and putting these into an economic or livelihoods context and quantifying the gaps that people are facing. Second strand is the market analysis, which is about understanding the capacity and the constraints of the critical market systems, and hence being able to assess their ability, their capability to play a role in the emergency response, and understanding what the impact of the crisis has been on those capabilities and constraints and capabilities of the market system. And the third strand is the response analysis. And this is about comparing the feasibility, the benefits and the risks associated with different response options and that the agencies have in front of them. And in practice, the idea is that these 3 strands kind of bind together into a really strong rope that supports the weight of the conclusions that those doing the analysis are then presenting to decision makers and donors. A second central idea that we borrowed from elsewhere in the toolkit is the market map itself. This actually is simply a way of representing and reducing a quite complex situation, complex relationships and linkages, and into sort of pulling it all into something very simple and easily graspable on a single sheet of paper. I'm not going to try and talk you through the market map because I don't know whether the slide is big enough to see the details. Essentially, it has 3 components. There's a section of it that looks at the linkages in the supply chains or the value chains that are the core of those markets. It also looks at the infrastructure and support services that enable those businesses and their relationships to work. And it also looks at the kind of market environment, the policies and the factors, social factors, political factors, institutional factors that influence, that create the rules for that market system. This market mapping approach was actually developed by Practical Action for a development contest. It was developed for participatory workshops where we're trying to engage market actors, stakeholders, traders, people with, from within the market system, and there's obviously a lot of problems of social barriers, language barriers, communication barriers in doing that. And the innovation that in using this for an emergency situation really came from Panteleo Creti, Lily's former colleague at Oxfam. He applied this sort of thinking to an emergency situation in Haiti as way back in 2004. And basically, again, it's really about overcoming communication barriers, but in this case, it's about overcoming the barriers of communicating the essence of a situation to very busy program managers and donors who need a briefing in 5 minutes about what's going on and why people want to take a particular course of action. I want to emphasize that this phase of the work was very collaborative. We had a great deal of valuable advice and critical comments from some very expert people in the sector. I hope that all of those who contributed at that stage are acknowledged in the book, in the acknowledgements in the book. And I know that some of you are actually here today, which is fantastic. So can I just say thank you, because it was really invaluable. We finished the first version of the toolkit back in March 2008. That's Emmett and myself. And but that version is probably almost unrecognisable now from what is in the book, because we then went through a process of reiterating and revising that version. And this was mainly, obviously, this was partly in response to the comments we'd received, but it was also largely as a result of the pilot testing phase, where we learned a lot of lessons, really, about how to make the toolkit work on the ground in reality. So let me just take you through the pilot testing phase. There were 4 pilots that were done during the course of that sort of 12 months from March 2008 to March 2009. The first was in Kenya, following election violence. The second was in Myanmar, after Cyclone Nargis. The third was in Haiti, after a series of tropical storms and hurricanes in the start of that summer. And the fourth one was in Pakistan, after the sort of massive internal refugee problem they had when the conflict restarted in the Northwest Frontier province. These pilots were a nightmare to organise because, as you can imagine, we were asking host agencies who had a lot on their plate in these crises to take on this extra thing of supporting us and allowing us to kind of practice or try out this piece of work. And so we owe a huge thanks to a whole range of agencies. CHF International, various Red Cross agencies helped us. Save the Children, Mercy Corps, the World Food Programme, ACDI VOCA, as well as, of course, local offices of Oxfam and IRC. We learnt a huge amount. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to the two people who actually led those pilot processes. One was Anita Auerbach, who's now in Khartoum with ICRC, and the other is Dee Galuba, who works for Mercy Corps and is now in Colombo. They not only did the EMA or led the EMA studies on the ground, but also had the capacity to stand back from the process and sort of reflect on what had worked well and what happened, what the strengths and weaknesses were in the toolkit, and feed back to me what we needed to change and update and revise. My own personal experience during that process was in Myanmar. I went out there really to get a feel for the whole experience myself. And it was very telling. The context in Myanmar was that, first of all, neither Anita or I had actually direct access to the disaster area because of government restrictions on travel. So we had to rely on training up a local team who would then work unsupervised for 2 weeks in the field. And that local team was basically largely very inexperienced, and also, with one or two exceptions, didn't speak English, and we, of course, didn't speak Burmese. So we had to learn the whole. We had to teach them the whole EMA concept and process in 2 or 3 days, right down to the level of how you interview a trader in the field. And I had effectively a crash course in thinking through how to simplify and reduce the whole EMA process to make it accessible to people like that, to local staff. It was, it was hard work, but it brought home to me the importance of making the processes in the toolkit accessible to people, and so that they had the confidence to go out and ask those questions that Paul was talking about. I don't think the EMA toolkit's perfect. I wish it was half the volume it is, half the thickness. But I think we largely did achieve that goal of making it intelligible to non-market and economic specialists. So I'm going to wrap up now. That process of the pilots finished in the spring of last year, and between then and now we've got the book published. We've developed an accompanying CD-ROM of materials and links to key websites, and there's a lot of other tools out there that are relevant to people using EMA. And we've also developed a training program, and that has been rolled out and to a large number of people already. And the toolkit itself has also been used in earnest in 2 crises. It was used in Padang after the earthquake in Sumatra, and it's obviously been used very recently in Haiti. And I'd like to hand over to Carrie, who's going to tell you a bit about those aspects.